Good evening and welcome to Alum Rock Christian Church in San Jose, California. We are about to start the season which we call Advent, or the preparation for the coming of the Lord. For the next 25 evenings, we are going to share with you a reflection by Allison Pittman in her book, a wonderful book called Keeping Christmas. And in this book, Allison compares the transformation of Ebenezer Scrooge into a new man to the transformation that we all have as Christians when we believe in Jesus Christ. So we hope that you will tune in every night and watch this with us. If you make a comment on YouTube or Facebook to let us know that you were there, and if you watch all 25 presentations, we would like to send you a free copy of this great book by Allison Pittman called Keeping Christmas. So we hope that you'll share it with your friends and join in every night for this great reflection as we get our hearts ready for the coming of Christmas. On our Advent calendar for December the 3rd, we open the drawer and find a donkey. They set out on their journey to the town of Bethlehem, for God had told the angel he had given a son to them. Good evening, and welcome to our Advent reflection called Keeping Christmas by Allison Pittman. Tonight, we look at chapter 3. Good afternoon, gentlemen. And now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three. But the greatest of these is charity. 1 Corinthians 13 and 13. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It might be a cozy scene, dark and foggy, with Scrooge in the front of the room and his clerk, the mild Bob Cratchit, toiling away in a similar room beyond. But coziness requires fire. bits of conversation, maybe a cup of tea. Instead, we have fog rolling in through the keyholes and the fingers so stiffened with cold that they can barely function. Scrooge keeps the door to Cratchit's alcove open, not so they can exchange cheerful quips of conversation, but so that he can keep an eye on his clerk, lest the poor man try to warm his office with an additional shovelful of coal. And it's Christmas Eve. We all know Christmas Eve is that night of unbearable anticipation, the night children nestle with sugary dreams. It's when courageous reindeer burst through the fog, red nose blazing, brave nutcracker soldiers come to life, Grinchy plans go awry. History gives us 3 Eves of Christ: the night before he is born, the night before he is crucified, and the night before he rises. 3 befores, 3 afters: a birth, a death, a resurrection. 3 times the world is irreversibly changed. On one of those eves, Jesus rightfully predicts that Peter will deny him 3 times. Peter protests, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." But of course, he does. So too is this opening scene. Scrooge passes up 3 opportunities to acknowledge Christmas. First, he is greeted by his affable nephew, Fred, who generously invites Scrooge to spend Christmas with him and his family. We get the impression that this is an annual occurrence, both the invitation and the refusal. This is where Scrooge utters his first iconic humbug. Next, his offices are visited by the gentleman soliciting businesses for charitable donations. Some slight provision for the poor and the destitute who suffer greatly. These poor guys have no idea what they're getting into, asking Ebenezer Scrooge to donate to the hundreds of thousands in want of common comforts. Perhaps Marley was a softer touch back in the day, but Marley's been gone now these 7 years. Not only does Scrooge offer nothing, his solution to poverty in London is to send the poor to prisons and workhouses. When one gentleman says that many would rather die than go to such places, Scrooge delivers his most hate-filled denial of Christmas. "If they would rather die," said Scrooge, "then they had better do it and decrease the surplus population." The line that follows, though, speaks to his denial. He says, after being confronted with the plight of the poor in his city, "Besides, excuse me, I don't know that." To which the gentleman says, "But you might know it." And Scrooge replies, "It is not my business. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly." So too does the Apostle Peter. When a servant girl confronts him, observes him, looks at him closely, and says she saw him with Jesus of Nazareth, Peter says, I don't know what you're talking about," is recorded in Mark 14:68. He dismisses her just as Scrooge dismisses Fred and the gentleman. Peter denies knowing Christ. Scrooge denies knowing the means to be Christ-like. Peter, all round up in panic and guilt and fear, escalated the tone of his third response. A little later, some of the other bystanders comforted Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." He began to call down curses on himself and swore to them, "I don't know this man that you're talking about." Immediately, the rooster crowed a second time, and Jesus' words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. Peter broke down and wept. Scrooge, too, gets a little overheated when an innocent boy stands at the door to offer a sweet Christmas carol. Scrooge charges out, brandishing a ruler like a whip, sending the offending songster to scatter in the snow. Their song is Scrooge's cock crow. But where Peter's reaction is swift, he breaks down weeping. Well, Scrooge isn't quite there yet. He says to his long-suffering clerk, Bob Cratchit, "You'll want all the day tomorrow, I suppose." "If quite convenient, sir." "Well, it's not convenient," said Scrooge, "and it's not fair. If I want to stop you a half a crown for it, you think yourself ill-used. I'll be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "Look there for a moment." The clerk smiled faintly. Cratchit has just observed this man, his boss, insulting lovable Fred, speaking a death wish upon the poor, and threatening violence to a child, singing a blessing to merry gentlemen. And yet, Cratchit smiles, because he knows, deep down, that Scrooge will relent. Jesus always knew that Peter would come to him, that Peter would become the followers of his church. And even before these pesky moments of denial, Jesus said to him, "I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Matthew 16 and 18. Can you imagine how wonderful life would be, how reassuringly simple and stress-free if we could have such a conversation with Jesus? If he could look us in the eye and say, "This is who you are, and this is who you will be." But even in those moments when we feel so far away from his voice, when we're mired in the consequences of decisions we have made in our eve of denial, he sees us. More importantly, he allows us the opportunity to see him, to know him. Hebrews 10 and 36 speaks of the promise we receive when we come out of our dark and step into the life he has been planning for us all along. In the final pages of A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer, remember Stone of Help? Ebenezer will become the one of whom it was always said, "He knew how to keep Christmas well. If any man alive possessed the knowledge." He will come to accept Christmas, to practice Christmas, to live Christmas. This same man who hours before denied any connection with the holiday and lived without any evidence of connection to the one for whom the holiday is named. So there's the eve, the cockcrow, and the dawn. Right now for Scrooge, night is falling. We hope you will join us tomorrow for the next chapter. Good night and God bless.